Okay, this part here, E10, it is not going on easily. Fart. Oh, man. Okay. God bless it. This is really a weird fit. Okay, that's supposed to go even more in, I guess. And then that comes up there, according to the drawing. Ay, 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 ay. This is a wacko detail here.
Welcome back to Jet Scale Models and to part 2 of the Dragon 1/35 scale PaK 43/3 L71 mit Behelfsfette build. In this episode, we wrapped up the main gun assembly, and now it's time to shift our attention to the carriage, starting with the main base, then working through the turntable, revisiting the trailer bogies, and finishing up with the axles, wheels, and stowage details that give this kit its late war, no frills look.
All right. Well, that's the only way it can fit. And I guess this other one should go up more now, too.
This isn't your average field piece. It's a weapon built in desperation, using what was available, and that comes through in every step of this build. So let's get into it.
Let's do this.
All right, we got to make another one of these. So that goes there. You know, I'm going to use some black glue again. That way I can sand it later.
One of the problems with CA glue is that nozzles often get plugged up. You can clean all the CA off by using something like acetone. It will clear it off, but it is one of the downfalls of CA glue, having to open the nozzle sometimes. You can see here I'm using an awful lot of CA glue, and somebody in the comments is obviously going to say, man, don't put so much CA on there, you're using... But my idea here is as a gap filler, and removing the CA is very easy later by using a Q-tip and some debonding fluid. It's not that big of a deal. And you don't have to do it if you don't want to do it that way, but that's how I've chosen to do it. One of the good things about using CA as a filler is that you can use an accelerator that will make it harden pretty quickly, and then you can go back in and sand it or do whatever you want.
Don't try this at home, kids.
I'm going to set these aside and let them harden up. And I'll come back later and clean off the excess with some debonder.
All right, here we are at step 5. And we'll build this crucible here, crucifix. First, we've got to clean up these attachment points, though.
Well, I'll spare you any more video of me removing this CA, but it came off without a problem. Well, here you can see I'm actually using some sanding techniques. I find a file works really well for keeping everything flat and perpendicular. But I actually came back later and added a little bit more Tamiya putty into this end of the Cruciform. It just wasn't quite where I wanted it with the CA glue.
To make these parts J2 with clear. Now I don't have any idea if the real one had little windows to look at something, but somehow I doubt it. So maybe they just had some clear plastic they needed to inject to get rid of. It's all they had on hand or something. But yeah, those go like that.
These clear parts that are molded in clear for some unknown reason go onto parts B6 and B7.
And then that'll go in there like that.
A quick side note, I actually put a little bit of Tamiya putty on the ends of a couple of the outriggers. They needed a bit of filling. Step 6 adds the turntable, and this part is crucial for both modeling and historical accuracy. The PaK 43/3 didn't have full mobility, but the limited traverse provided by the turntable allowed for small corrections without moving the entire frame. The kit captures that subtle detail well, just enough mechanical definition to bring it out with washes and dry brushing. You start to feel the bulk of the weapon taking shape now, sitting low and lethal, ready to drop into position behind rubble or brush. Then comes step 7, and we start on the Sonderanhänger 202 Bogies. These aren't random trailers, they're the exact type used to haul the famous flak 88mm guns into place. The German army, pressed for time and materials, took what was already in service and adapted it for their heaviest ground gun. In part 7, we work on the wheels and the axles. The wheels are on the 2 G-sprues. Each tire is made up of 5 slices that go together to make the tread pattern as accurate as possible. It's an improvement over the usual previous model tires provided that have a seam that needs sanding, which may mar a tread pattern.
So these wheels are kind of kooky. How much you gotta do?
Well, as this next little bit might be a little bit boring to watch, I'm going to do a little bit more narration. So let's take a look. By the time the PaK 43/3L/71 mit Behelfswaffe rolled onto the battlefield, the war was tilting hard against Germany. Allied armor, especially the Soviet IS-2Ss and American M26 Pershings, had pushed German anti-tank needs into crisis mode. The standard wheeled carriages of the 88mm PaK 43 were becoming scarce, time and materials were in short supply, and production had to be ramped up at all costs. So, in typical late war fashion, a compromise was struck. Mount the powerful L-71 gun on a simplified fixed base platform. The Behelfswaffe, literally makeshift mount. This wasn't some graceful field piece designed for easy movement or long-term use. These things were often built using leftover parts from damaged mounts, repurposed flat carriages, or even just raw steel plate. The result was a static or semi-mobile gun platform with extremely limited traverse, often dug in or camouflaged at crossroads, tree lines, or within the rubble of urban centers. But here's where things get hairy. The recoil of the 88mm L/71 was not forgiving. It was a long-barreled gun firing a high-velocity shell, and on the standard PaK 43 carriage, with a proper recoil brake and splayed trails, the weapon was barely manageable. On the Behelfswaffe, well, there were some problems. Crews had to reinforce the gun's position with logs, sandbags, or concrete to keep it from shifting with every shot. If the ground was soft, the recoil would drive the whole assembly backward, making re-aiming a nightmare. Sometimes the frame would physically jump. There are anecdotal reports of gun crews having to reset their position entirely after just a handful of rounds. That's not great when you're dealing with tanks coming at you at 20 miles per hour. Mobility was a joke. The Behelfswaffe could be towed very short distances if absolutely necessary, usually by half-tracks or recovery vehicles, but often these guns were essentially abandoned in place once deployed. And because they were so hard to reposition, they were typically placed in ambush roles, hidden, pre-sighted positions where they could get the first shot off before falling back. Still, when it worked, it worked. The L-71 was one of the most powerful anti-tank guns of the war. It could punch straight through the frontal armor of a Sherman, a Churchill, or even a late-war T-34 from ranges the enemy thought were safe. It was just a matter of getting that first round off before someone spotted your position and called in artillery or an airstrike. In many ways, the PaK 43/3 mit Behelfswaffe is a perfect symbol of late-war German military machine. Technically brilliant, brutally effective, and hastily cobbled together under pressure. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polished, but it gave one last bite before the whole thing came down. Used on vehicles like the Tiger II and the Jagdpanther, its development began in 1942, following battlefield reports that the older PaK 40, even the feared 88 flak guns, were starting to struggle against newer tanks, especially the Soviet KV-1, T-34/85, and later the IS-2, as well as the American M4 Sherman variants coming ashore in Normandy. The L-71 refers to the barrel being 71 calibers long, which made it an extremely high-velocity weapon. In practical terms, that meant that it could penetrate any Allied tank at long range, even those coming into service in 1944 and 1945. For example, it could punch through the armor of a Churchill or a T-34 from over 2 kilometers away. The gun had a muzzle velocity of around 1,130 meters per second when firing its standard AP-CBC, which stands for Armor-Piercing Capped Ballistic Cap rounds, which made its trajectory flatter and more accurate at range. This velocity and penetration made it a terrifying weapon capable of destroying even the thickest Allied armor before those vehicles could bring their own guns to bear. In terms of ammunition, the PaK-43 fired a range of 88mm shells. The most commonly used was the Panzergranate 39/43 APC-BC shell, which had excellent armor penetration and was the primary anti-tank round. It also fired a tungsten-cored, armor-piercing composite rigid APCR round. Panzergranate 40-34, though tungsten shortages meant it was in short supply. There was also a high-explosive shell, Sprenggranate 34, used against infantry and light vehicles. The gun's chamber and breech were specifically designed to handle the higher pressures of these rounds compared to earlier 88s like the Flak 36/37. As for how well it worked, there's no sugarcoating it. The PaK-43 was devastatingly effective. Allied crews feared it, especially when it was well camouflaged. It could knock out a Sherman or T-34 before they even spotted it. But it wasn't perfect. It was big, heavy, around 4,400 kilograms in the field, and hard to move without a prime mover like the SD KFZ-7. Crews sometimes had to abandon the gun if retreating quickly. The simplified Behelfslafette makeshift mount you're working on in the Dragon kit was a way to speed up production and deal with the mounting pressures on German industry in the last years of the war. There are several anecdotal accounts of how the PaK-43 earned its reputation. One story from Normandy involved a single PaK-43 dug into a hedgerow near Caen. It was crewed by a mixed group, some Wehrmacht regulars, a couple of Hitler Youth lads barely out of school, and one grizzled veteran who had previously served on the Eastern Front. They were set up at a choke point where the British armored column was expected to pass. According to an account from a British officer who survived the engagement, the first sign of the gun's presence was a flash from the hedge line, followed by an instant destruction of the lead Churchill tank. The round struck just below the turret ring, igniting the ammunition. Within minutes, 3 more tanks were burning, and infantry was scrambling into the ditches. The British had to call in artillery to plaster the area before they could advance, and even then they found the PaK had already been abandoned. Its crew melted away into the woods. Another story comes from the Eastern Front in 1944. During the Soviet summer offensive, a battery of PaK-43s from a Luftwaffe field division, ironically not known for top-notch equipment, was set up along a forest road. The gunners had practiced ambush tactics extensively, and when a column of T-34/85s and supply trucks came rumbling through, they waited until the lead tank was just at the curve, then opened fire. One round after another struck with pinpoint accuracy. The Soviets, thinking they were facing a much larger force, pulled back temporarily. The gunners knocked out 7 tanks and at least a dozen trucks before retreating under cover of darkness. One of the surviving crew members later wrote that the gun gave them a feeling of holding the power of the gods in their hands, but added that the moment anything flanked them or they ran out of ammo, they were as helpless as boys with sticks. Even Allied war diaries mention the weapon with grudging respect. Sherman crews referred to it as the Long 88, and tank commanders were trained to spot its distinctive long barrel poking through hedgerows or tree lines. If they saw it, they were often told to radio artillery and avoid engaging directly unless they had a clear shot from the flank or rear. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but ultimately hampered by its weight and the dwindling logistics of the late war German army. Still, when it was set up properly, with good fields of fire and plenty of ammunition, it was unstoppable.
Okay, well, I don't know. Did I show how these go together on the other 88 build? Basically, you can see here, it's like slices. Now, I'm having some issues with how these are lying down in there. You can see here, bit of a gap there. My point is you may have to drill these holes out so things fit better. Here's all the parts laid out. I started this kit months ago, so some of this is kind of out of sequence a bit, but we'll carry on. So I'm going to take care of E4 onto F44 and F45. So all right. To do that, I need to get the orientation correct. So I'm going to glue part F43 and 42 into position. But first of all, I have to clean them up. So you have to duplicate all of this. Okay, so we're going to build up these leaf springs, and we're going to have to put this little part E14 onto the bigger parts. And you will notice that these are different on either end. So make sure you get them going to the right place.
In step 8, you're locking in the axles and wheels, being added to nicely molded fender parts which have been previously put together. These are straight off the Sonderang Hangar 202, big heavy-duty field wheels with no pretense of finesse. It's all about weight distribution and getting the weapon where it needed to be. Dragon did a solid job here. The hubs and axle mounts are molded well, and once the wheels go on, they look pretty. You start to see the finished silhouette emerge. The massive barrel, the tight mount, and those rugged transport bogies that once carried a flak gun now reworked for this brute of an anti-tank piece.
It's a bit too tight. All right, well, this is what I mean about dragging instructions. You see this do not glue? It's not really clear that it's meant for this part, E6. It almost looks like it's talking about E5. Like that wire, that line should be blue. So it matches that because it's so close, the tangent. Anyways. So that goes in there. Oh, let's see. So there's a good indication which way this goes. There's a small hole and a big hole.
All right. That's it for part 2 of the PaK 43/3 build. We've got the mount sorted, the Sonderanhänger 202 trailer components back in play, and the whole setup starting to look like a serious bit of battlefield hardware. In the next part, we'll get into mounting the gun itself, working on whatever parts need to get stuck on, and bringing all these sub-assemblies together. In the meantime, and in between time, that's another edition of Jet Scale Models. Y'all come back now, you hear?